Hey, welcome to my channel. My name is Dr. TK, and in this video, I will be covering the 5 things you want to consider if you are looking to apply to graduate school as a psychology student. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So I want you to imagine that you are about to apply to graduate school within the next 12, maybe even 18 months. And so tip number 1, I do have my notes here so I can make sure that I don't miss anything. Tip number 1 is you want to think about where do you want to be after you graduate. So what that really means is that you want to have the end goal in mind. So for example, do you know maybe where you want to work? Do you know who you may want to work with? And I say may because this can change over time, especially as you get more knowledge and you also go out there into the field. And so this also may determine where you want to work in terms of location or organizational type. So for example, I knew that I had to get my doctorate degree because I wanted to do psychological testing. I cannot just stop at the master's level. I have to get the doctorate level. And there are graduate programs out there, such as a PsyD program, that will allow you to earn your master's degree during the first half of the doctoral program. So start with the end goal in mind. Understand or have a better, just an overview of who you may want to work with and where you want to work. And that may determine what type of program you apply to. Number 2 is what type of therapist or psychologist or type of researcher in the psychology field do you want to become? So for example, like I said, I'm a clinical psychologist, but you also have developmental psychologists, community psychologists. You have substance abuse counselors where they have a certification. You also have master's level therapists such as people who have an LPC, marriage and family therapists, clinical social worker. Across different states, there are different licensure types, but that also again goes back to number 1, what do you want to do? Some people who go into the psychology field actually does not want to do any type of therapy services. Maybe you want to get into research, so you may need to look at what type of curriculum do you need, for example, to get the degree that you need in order to get the job that you desire to get. So the reason why you want to understand what kind of therapist, I'll use the word psychologist for myself, what kind of psychologist you want to become is that when I was applying to graduate school, these are all the things that I considered. If I want to become a clinical psychologist, that will determine which school I would actually apply to because certain schools have specific specialties. I would also look at what kind of degree was required in order for me to do what I wanted to do at the end. So because I wanted to do clinical psychology, I knew that I can either apply to a PhD program or a PsyD program. The biggest difference is that PhD is more heavily focused on research. The PsyD program still has research methods. It still has statistics. You still have to do a dissertation before you graduate and get your degree. However, it's more practical based. We spend more time on understanding theory and how to actually conduct therapy. So another thing to consider when you're looking at what kind of therapist is, it will determine what kind of prerequisites you need to take while you're in undergrad before you can even apply to graduate school. The last thing you want to do is go in blindsided, believe that all psychology graduate programs are the same, and then you're ready to apply. And you see there are 4 different types of requirements for undergrad. And now you have to spend an extra year or a couple of extra semesters and more money so that you can properly apply to the school that you desire to go to. So make sure that you do your homework ahead of time. Number 3, I mentioned this in the beginning, but you do want to have a clear understanding of who you want to work with. So let's dive deeper into that. When I was going into graduate school, I knew that from even working in group homes at undergrad that I wanted to work initially with teenagers. And so I chose to even volunteer my time and get jobs in places that would make me a more well-rounded like candidate, right? Meaning I would look more attractive on the application. But also when you go and you apply to these schools, some of them will have tracks such as a developmental psychology track, child and adolescent track, marriage and family therapy track, geriatric mental health services track, testing track, neuropsychology track, so many tracks. And so when there is a track, I'm not gonna say that it puts you into a box. However, more than likely, majority of your curriculum will be aligned with that specialty. So for example, when you go through undergrad, you go through your general ed requirements, which is pretty much getting your hands into multiple pots of different degree classes so that you can really fine tune what direction do you want to take your degree at the end. And that's where we see a lot of undergraduate students actually changing their major because they become more interested in some of those general educational requirement classes, and then you end up taking like higher division courses, typically your last 2 years. So think about a track as what's equivalent to the last 2 years of your undergrad. It has everything to do with psychology, for example. So if you did a track for child and adolescent, it doesn't mean that you won't learn about different theories in psychology. However, there will be a certain portion of your curriculum, and there will potentially even be a requirement for you to graduate and go do internship or practicum hours aligned with that track. So I chose clinical psychology personally because when I took a look at the curriculum, I realized that it was boxing me in because I knew I may not want to work forever only with children and adolescents. So again, like number one said, keep the end goal in mind, and that may help you make the decision of what type of program you're applying to. Okay, so tip number 4 is you want to sit down and ask yourself, what type of graduate school environment do I actually want to be in? 4, 3, 4, 5, or maybe even 6 years. And so logistically speaking, you first want to just look at the basics. Do I want to have the opportunity to go and sit in a campus and go to a lecture, small or big, or do I only want to go online, or do I want a hybrid program where I can do a mixture of the two? You also want to ask yourself, do you even care if you go to a private school? Like in California, USC is considered a private school. Do you want to go to a traditional school like a UCLA or just 4-year university, in which they probably also have undergraduate programs there? Or would you prefer, or you don't mind going to a professional school like California Psychology School? I just made that school up, but that's just a prime example. Some people, it does matter because of the end goal. So for example, when I was going through the graduate application process and someone had asked me, where do you want to work? I said, I don't know, maybe in a school, but I'm not sure. And so they said, do you think that you want to maybe work in the VA, or do you want to work in these larger state facilities or institutions? And I said, that may become of interest to me at one point in my career. So they said, because you said you might want to work in those places, you definitely want to go to a school that is APA accredited. They didn't really have a preference on if it was private, public, or a professional school, but it started with that accreditation. And I chose a school at the time that was APA accredited. Now there are some schools that are WASC accredited, but also look at the jobs in the job description that you want to apply to. Some of them are very, very specific with what type of accreditation your school has to have in order for you to even apply for the job, let alone being able to apply to internships before you graduate, because certain internships also have a requirement. And lastly is tip number 5. You want to be able to take action. So I'm just gonna list out the things that you want to consider to take fast action in the next couple of months. Number 1 is, what is the length of time required in order for you to graduate from that graduate program? Because that may be a lifestyle change that Of course, I believe that it's worth it because I did it in 4 years. However, I was single at the time. I did not have any children when I graduated. And you have to consider what's going on in your life right now, or maybe what you plan on going in your life within that time frame that you'll be going to school and then graduating from school. Also know your capacity. So capacity meaning, are you able to commit to going to class every single semester? Are you committed to taking 4 to 5 classes because the school will give you a curriculum to follow, very similar to undergrad, but it's more of a curriculum that you have to follow with most schools in order to graduate and take the classes in order, because graduate school is a lot more intimate than a undergrad program with thousands of students. So are you committed to the capacity that you have to learn the new information, do the homework, write the papers, and actually graduate in due time? Number 3 is you want to consider the cost of tuition. Now, as I mentioned in the previous tip, we talked about public school or traditional school versus private versus professional. All of those may have a different investment tag. I don't want to say price tag because you're investing in your education for your future career and or a psychology business. However, you may go out of state, for example, because that's something else you want to consider. Does that program have out of state tuition? If it is more of a traditional school, it might. If it's a psychology school, it might not. You have to do your research. Living expenses. This was a big issue when I went to school, because when we entered into the program, the cohort before us said, oh my gosh, you guys are what's known as the cap year. And I'm like, what is the cap year? And they said that the amount that we were able to borrow for student loans would only cover the tuition, but it would not cover living expenses and it would not cover any books. And sure enough, when we got the reimbursement, we didn't get any additional money, which meant that we had to, if you didn't have the funds or your parents or caregivers did not pay for the money or family, we had to take out a private loan to pay for rent. And at that time, I had moved away from my home base. I moved up to Northern California from Southern California. So we had to pay for an apartment that was a lot more than what I was paying in Los Angeles when we moved. It was almost double the amount. And then we also had to pay for basic living expenses. We had to continue paying for car notes and things like that. So you want to consider living expenses, and based on the capacity of the program, you may be, or you will be required to do what's considered practicum hours or internship hours. Depending on the school structure, in a doctoral program, we were required to do 16 hours a week starting our second year. So what does that mean if you're going to school for about 15 hours a week? Then you have to go to internship for 16 hours a week and see clients and do trainings. Then you also have to still write your papers, do your homework assignments. And if you have a family, you still have to have that hat on and cater to your family. What is your capacity? Can it be done? Yes. Did I go to school with other single moms or parents or people who were older? Because those are some of the questions that I get on YouTube. Yes. Do they have to have internal commitment? Yes, because nobody's holding you by the hand and making sure that you do your homework. Graduate school is a privilege and it is a choice. So if you cannot commit to even going through your higher division undergrad classes that you chose the major for, odds are you may have to check your level of motivation before you apply to graduate school, because also more money is on the line, okay? So another thing that you want to consider, as I mentioned before, is can you work, and how will that fluctuate throughout your graduate program? So for example, when I first started working in the Bay Area, when I went to school, we moved out there. I was, with an ex-partner, and we moved out there the summer before I started school in the fall because I wanted to get acclimated to the environment. So I chose to apply for a job, and I worked at Best Buy as a cashier, then moved up to customer service, then moved up to Geek Squad. I worked there my whole 3 years while I was taking my coursework, and then I moved back home to Los Angeles for my internship. So what ended up happening is my first year, I was working about 20 to 25 hours a week because all it was coursework. In my second year of my program, that's when we were required to do our practicum hours of 16 hours for year 2 and year 3. Now, I actually had a master's degree before I went into my doctoral program. So in my second year, I was able to shave off at least one class a semester, meaning I tested out of it from my master's program. In my third year, I was only taking by my last semester one class, which meant that I had a extenuating circumstance where I didn't have a full caseload like my counterparts in terms of like curriculum. However, I saw that a lot of my counterparts were tired or they just could not work. And why I'm bringing this up is because your hours that you started off working may not look the same during the subsequent years in your graduate program. And if you choose to seek your doctorate level, degree, then during the last year, you are doing a full-time internship unless you choose to do half-time, which means that you're pushing out your graduation year another year. You have to do a certain amount of hours. In California, we had to do 1,500 because they wanted to give us a heads up or a leg up of being able to get licensed faster, because we have to do a total of 3,000 hours. So our program was structured to do 1,500 pre-doc internship hours, which meant that I worked full-time from September until pretty much June or July to get my 1,500 hours. And I had my internship at Los Angeles County, which is where I ended up working for a while after. Then when I graduated, I did another 1,500 hours, and then clearly I studied for the licensing exam and I got licensed. And so I hope by now with these tips, you can now look at the process that you need to take for research purposes and also internal motivation to determine what graduate school do you want to go to, and most importantly, how do you need to show up as your best self when you're applying for those programs, and to choose the right program that matches where you are and who you are. So if you love this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please, if you are new to the channel, subscribe to the channel, or even if you're returning but you have not subscribed, I would love for you to subscribe and become part of the abundant community. And also, I would love to hear in the comment box, what was your favorite tip and what did that bring up for you? If you have any additional questions about this topic, feel free to drop me a comment so that we can continue to engage. And you never know, I can turn that question into a full YouTube video, okay, to help you out. And so until the next video, I'll see you later. Bye.